Hi, Ben.
Excellent. Hi, Carl.
Sorry, you said jump right into it, and I caught you off guard.
You did catch me off guard. How are you?
I am okay. It's a weird day.
We're having a weird
Weird.
day.
We're having a weird day. This is attempt number 2 at recording this episode. I'm gonna, let the listeners know how the sausage is made, and let them know that the first batch of sausage was tainted.
Tainted sausage. Well, there's a song called Tainted Love, but I can't remember the melody.
I'm pretty sure sausage was not in the song. It should have. It should have been.
It is now.
If I ever get hired to write a jingle for the FDA for like a salmonella warning commercial, now I know who to call. So I'm glad we had this.
Hell yeah.
This moment, Ben.
Amazing. Well, Carl, why don't you tell us what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, this is going to be a short one, but I am a dork and I want to talk about masking. But I don't just want to talk about frequency masking. I want to talk about rhythmic masking. So, just a quick little recap for anybody that's listening that may not know what frequency masking is. Essentially, it is when there are frequencies in non-priority instruments that are in the same space as priority instruments, and that could also mean a vocal, obviously, that make it harder to clearly hear and perceive the more important layer. So a good example would be maybe there's too much, 4K in the electric guitars and the hi-hats and the tambourine, and the vocals are now being you have to overcompensate and either crank up some of the presence in the vocals to have them be heard, or you're cranking up the volume to try to compensate for that, when really, if you just, maybe got a little bit of that frequency range out of the cymbals, the guitars, whatever it is, then it actually helps to pull things back and leave that little bit of space for the instrument that is more important, right? So, when people talk about masking and mixing, 99% of the time, they're talking about it in the context of frequency masking. But in that 1%, it's probably me going on some sort of, rambling diatribe about rhythmic masking, which the way that I look at it, it is when there are just too many different rhythmic elements happening, too many different rhythms, and it actually works to the detriment of the groove and the detriment of the listener's ability to pick out what is actually meant to be the focus in that moment of the song.
Or maybe it even distracts from the core of the song, which is the melody, the hook, the vocal.
Yeah. So I'm a drummer, Ben's a bass player. So I feel like we are hypersensitive to this. And I think we're always conscious of it because we were kind of, we trained our ears from the beginning to be aware of this and to kind of know where we fit in the pocket, right? There's that magical term, the pocket. And what happens when things are masked by their frequencies, not only is that pocket kind of lost, but also that the whole focus of what the listener should be feeling, what the listener should be listening to is lost because of, like you said, it's just a distracting extra parts that aren't necessarily adding to the groove, but they are added to the groove, but they're not adding to the groove.
Right. They make the feel, it changes the feel to the point where maybe this rhythm is not the rhythm that we thought belonged in the song to begin with.
Yeah. And I think a good place to start for you, Ben, is, to you, what is, or what's an example of rhythmic masking? Like, can you think of an example in your adventures as a bassist, as a producer, as a mix engineer, where you felt that things were being masked by less important layers rhythmically?
Yeah. I don't know if I have a good example, but like maybe, a strummy ukulele where there's already kind of, guitars doing strumming and stuff, and you have the drums and the bass and everything else, and then all of a sudden you have this extra instrument that's just strumming along, and it's just adding a lot of little transients to the groove and just filling it up with just too much that there's like no space left. That's kind of something that I'm thinking about. But I think more what you're talking about is kind of like a percussive element, like a bongo or a tambourine that could maybe like, you're trying to lift up the song, but in doing so you're adding just too many transients, and all of a sudden the groove feels like too full. And then, there's like a fine line between having a groove that's just full enough and a groove that's too full, and a groove that's too full of like too many things happening. So you have like and then but then like you could just go overboard, and then next thing you know, all you hear is just like all of a sudden it feels like a Latin song when it's supposed to be a pop song or something like that. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm imagining.
So, two things. First, I want to say that that was wonderful to watch you because, we're filming this through Zoom. So I know we're both recording our mics, but what I'm hearing from you is just through Zoom. And I think Zoom's noise gate turned on when you were doing that. So I didn't hear a single
Oh
beatbox noise you were
shit.
making. I just saw you like sitting there dancing, but it was in pure silence.
You'll
And
you'll
it
hear
was,
it in post.
I'll hear it in post. I'm excited about that. But what I do want to say that but what I do want to say is that I don't just mean percussive elements. I think maybe a good example would be, and I feel like every high school band is guilty of this, or like band of like high school kids. It's when you're getting ready to go into the chorus and the drummer plays a fill and the guitarist plays a fill and the bassist plays a fill and the singer's doing like, a pickup into the chorus, and all of a
Cacophony.
sudden it's just like cacophony. And like even if they're you know not not necessarily out of tune with each other, they could melodically work, but it's when there are too many things all fighting for prominence all at
Right. It's
once
like
rather than
it's like
supporting
four
it.
cute ideas, and nobody was judicious enough to choose which one.
Yes, and something similar to that was happening with one of my mixing students this morning. I was on a call and we were going through a production, and luckily she was able to like she was doing the production as well, and the mixing. So we were trying to figure out how to make this chorus feel better because it just felt way too busy, but we didn't know what it was. And we just started simplifying things and not necessarily removing parts, but just simplifying parts so that way there are more things playing in unison. And the things that were not playing in unison were happening like I don't know if adjacent to each other is the right word. There's a word I'm looking for and I'm not
In
uh
in parallel.
in pair though, or like more of like a call and response.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
they're and I think that's something that when you listen to like really great producers, you notice that fills happen when there's a space to be filled. And I think I'm going to sound pretentious and say that I think there's a big difference between a fill and a transition. Fills can be used as a transition, but fills could be really anything that little, even little like ear candy pieces that there's a gap and there's like a cool little thing that happens in that gap. But when that cool little ear candy thing happens not in a gap and it's behind another part or in front of another part, it is actually, I think, doing more harm than good. It's going to give you the ear candy cavities. I don't know. That metaphor
Hmm.
broke down
Yeah, well,
pretty
if
quick,
it's
but
if it's a transition, it has to have a reverse symbol in it. That's the law, according to the Bible of music production, right?
I I will not confirm nor deny how often I do that. But
You know what I do a lot
yeah.
of is I do a lot of like reverse piano into the chorus.
Oh yeah.
Love that.
I love I know it's a little sidebar, but my favorite thing um is I call it the sub boomerang, where I'll
Mm.
have like a sub drop on, let's say, like beat one of the bar before the chorus, and it hits and it fades out like doom, and then I'll reverse it going into
Oh,
the
I like
chorus. So it'll be
that.
like doom.
I'm gonna mess with that soon
Whap. Yeah.
in the very
Anyway,
in the very near future. Yeah,
lots of beatboxing in this
this
episode.
is the beatbox episode. This is where we quit
Uh,
all the rest of the things we do and we just become full-time beatboxers.
I
This
wonder how many full time beatboxers there are.
there are probably like two, or
I'd say more than two.
whoever's in pentatonics right now.
Yeah.
And that's a great interview. People should listen to in the catalog of Secret Sonics. I interviewed Ed Boyer, who mixed a bunch of the pentatonic stuff. So that was like interesting if you're nerdy about a cappella kind of things.
Oh, yeah. So I'm gonna aggressively turn the truck back back onto the road.
Save us.
So yeah.
So in the transition, yeah. Go on.
In transitions, yeah. So in fills, and it boils down to thoughtfulness. And I think when we talked before about minimalism, I think that minimalism is best when it's not out of spite or principle, and more so as a byproduct of thoughtfully curating what's allowed to stay in that moment of the song.
Yeah.
And not being afraid to, use something or remove it or turn it way down if it's just like a texture thing you really want. And I think that's, when I was asked, I think it was yesterday, about things that things that I hear in, beginner mixes, or like mistakes that beginner mixers make. And it's not really a mistake. It's more of a mindset of not being willing and confident in being able to just mute things, and not being able to let go of an idea that they had before. Like, just because, like, when they made the original production of the song, they had this tambourine part that they really liked, and then even though it's actually hurting the song and not supporting it anymore because the context is developed, and they just don't want to get rid of it because they're used to hearing it, whether it's demoitis or out of principle, but not being able to allow yourself to
cut it,
and leave space for the more important things.
Yeah, I think this is kind of like you have to get used to saying no to things, right? We talk about all these all these things in other podcasts. Like, you have to learn to mute things and to be okay with shredding paper, because not every idea is golden. And you could always do save as, right? Or you could just it's still there muted, and you could unmute it if you want. But you have to be willing to try to hear things in a new light. And I think that's something that is interesting, because I get used to things also, and like, I've been doing this for a long time, and so like it's like its own sort of demoitis. Like, if you hear something as part of the song, then it's always part of the song. And sometimes you need to put on that cap and be like, what do you really need to do here? And sometimes it's someone else tells me, like, hey, like, let's get rid of that. We don't need it. I'm like, oh, but I got so used to it. But like, no, now that I took it out and I'm thinking about it and I have clarity, oh, this is better. And so being able to kind of just be okay with getting rid of things and not being so precious, because there's always another song.
Yeah, I think there's value in trying to prioritize the song itself over your familiarity with the song itself.
Right. Yeah.
Which is way, way easier said than done. I acknowledge that. I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to say that it's always the easiest thing. And it's pretty fucking hard to do that. But I think it just comes from practice.
Yeah. And there could be different versions of a song, right? Like, we have like, covers of great songs that are like sometimes even more famous than the original. Like, I'm just thinking about the Whitney Houston cover of like, like that song. That's like even bigger than Dolly Parton version in retrospect. You know what I mean? And like, I don't
know what you mean. I don't know what you mean. Please sing more of that. Please sing more of that so I can find
more of that.
Please. I've never heard that song. I don't know what you mean, Ben. Please just sing, like a minute and a half of that at full volume, please.
No, thanks. But it's got that famous snare or tom hit that you don't know if it's a snare or a tom, but there's like a lot of reverb because it's the 80s, and like everyone tries to count it on Instagram, and then they can never get it right. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah. I mean, no, I don't. Please sing it. Please.
No.
Ben, please sing it.
I won't do it, Carl.
You've made, okay, here's my issue with you right now, Ben. You've made over 200 episodes of this podcast, and not once have you broken into Whitney Houston.
This is the first time. Have you seen the There I Ruined It of that song? It's so funny.
Probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's got to go check out "There I Ruined It" and "I Will Always Love You" Whitney Houston version. Amazing, amazing. That's all I'll say. Just search for it.
So speaking of ruining things, be conscious of the layering in your
Yes,
songs.
yeah. Be very conscious and get used to muting things. And I think as a mixer, it's also like one of the most powerful tools we have is the mute button.
And
Y-
as a mixer, get used to having the conversation with your clients about, you know, the idea of muting some things and or at least like getting used to having that conversation and asking if it's okay to, right? Asking if you have permission to mute things if you think it's going to help the song.
Yeah,
And, reminding them that it's their song. They get the final say, but, you know,
this is what.
trusting your ears, trusting your gut, trusting the priorities that
Yeah.
you believe the artists have in mind for the different layers.
And speaking
And
of muting and masking, like we spoke about this a little bit in the episode that's not getting released. But there, in terms of like the stereo field, like you could put a lot of mush on all sides, and sometimes there's just a lot of stereo guitars or stereo pianos, and like don't be afraid to mute one side of the stereo field. Like that guitar could have more impact if it's just on the left side, and it's being accompanied on the right hand side by something else, and then you're not masking it with just a lot of stereo stuff. Like each part can have its place and enhance the song even more. I think like
yeah,
that's like something that you really need to think about when you're given a track, as a mixer. You just have to like, does this need to be in stereo? How wide does the stereo have to be? Like, and like,
yeah.
be judicious.
Because masking doesn't just happen with frequencies, doesn't just happen with rhythms. It could also happen with the the outskirts of your stereo field. It could be with just the volume balances. It could be with depth. Like if everything is if the things that are meant to be important are too washed out and you don't have any clarity, or if you have percussion layers that are really pokey and transienty and they're distracting you from the things that you really want to be on top. It's just trying to be conscious and making informed intentional decisions in your mix, not just about volume, not just about panning, not just about frequencies, but how any choice that you make for an instrument ultimately affects all the other instruments as well and how the other instruments are perceived. Being conscious of the three-dimensionality of each layer, but also the three-dimensionality of the impact that everything that you do has on the rest of the mix.
Yeah, everything you do kind of affects. There's like a symbiotic relationship to like literally everything you do in a mix to everything else in the mix, and so yeah, I guess masking can happen in all kinds of ways, and I think you kind of have to make a decision. I think early on in a mix about what's going to be a priority kind of rhythmic instrument. Aside from usually it's kick drum, it's kick, snare, bass, vocal, and then like maybe you could choose one more thing to kind of prioritize, but you can't prioritize all of the things. Otherwise, you're going to have a mush and you're going to have this big thing where everything is masking each other. And like I've mentioned this mix from a while ago that had like literally every warm instrument. I've mentioned
Mhm.
this several times on the podcast. It had like every warm instrument at the exact same time, like a warm kind of, you know, acoustic guitar that wasn't so bright, a cello, a bass that had a lot of low mids in it and was like intentionally so. Like everything was intentionally low mid. Like this ain't all getting in there, front and center, right? I mean that's more of like a frequency masking issue. But it's also about the arrangement and like what
Yeah.
you're choosing to prioritize. And even if you can't mute it, then how are you balancing it? And so maybe the cellos just become a texture, but the guitars carry the song, And so
Yeah.
like,
It's there's a quote from, or I'm probably, messing this quote up, but from The Incredibles, from that Disney movie,
love that
like,
movie.
when everything's special or when everyone's special, nobody's special. And so I look at mixing the same way. When everything's wide, nothing's wide. When everything's bright, nothing's bright. When everything's loud, nothing's loud. And it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, what should be the loudest? What should be the widest? What should be the brightest? What should be the deepest? What should be the wettest? What should be the driest?
Yeah. I was
Which is a lot, you
Yeah.
know?
So speaking of minimalism, I was listening to a podcast with a maximalist, Jacob Collier, and he was talking about like in sculpting, how like when you sculpt a sculpture, so much of what you're doing is like what's the negative space, like what isn't carved, and like the shadows. So like it's not just about what you are choosing to use; it's also about what you're choosing, where you're choosing to leave space, and also contrast. Like I don't know if this analogy is making sense, but basically you can't have everything, just kind of like what you're saying. Things have to be contrasting, and a lot of that can be inside of the arrangement and what you choose to prioritize and what you choose not to prioritize. And maybe we'll have less masking if we prioritize less things and the right things. I don't know. Is this kind of where we're getting? This is coming full circle with this podcast.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Less things, less of the not good, right things. Well, we ended that real smartly.
Yeah. The haunted episode.
This day has been haunted. Yeah. Well, thanks for putting up with us today. It was a weird one.
Well, this has been fun. Regardless of how kooky our day is going, it's been fun hanging with you, Carl. So thanks for doing it.
Of course. Thank you so much. You're great. You're wonderful. You're smart. You're talented. You're friendly. You're caring. You're loving.
I can't
all
handle.
good
I
things.
can't handle all the compliments.
But no. But then I'm going to have to try to aggressively end the conversation so that way you can't repeat anything. You can't respond to me, and you have to feel really awkward until next time we talk. So bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl.